So in a recent piece of writing that I did entitled Presence and Absence, which was adapted from a talk I gave at Artist Space about 1 year ago, I begin with the following rumination or question. Increasingly, as an artist, I have begun to feel my own voice becoming disembodied from myself. Who is it that is speaking? It is strange to envision oneself as a construct, a concept, outside your own body, but that is exactly what is perceived by others. An accumulation of objects made by a non-entity with a vague persona, skewed and squared by gestures and contexts. These gestures and contexts, and specifically the question, how is the value of a gesture determined, are points that I've been working with over the past few years, but tonight I'm just going to focus on exhibitions that I've done in the past 1 year, to keep it short. In the text Presence and Absence, I go on to speak about Katie Nolan, who's pictured here, and in general I address the topic of dropouts in the art world, something I've been thinking about for a few years. In brief, I argue that the practices of well-known artists that have dropped out, such as Lee Lozano, Charlotte Posenensky, Katie Nolan, and Laurie Parsons, and their similar gestures to leave the art world, is a positive position in that it both fulfills the trajectory of the progression of their work over their lifespan, and that it also shows the boundaries of the art world. The gesture to leave literally draws an outline around where the possibilities of the art world stop at any given time. So in a recent exhibition that I did entitled The Gesture is a Joke, which was in Belgium, I hung 2 bodies of work. So the paintings that you see here are from an ongoing body of work, which is generally titled Material Evidence. And they show just that, the evidence of the production of paintings in my studio. So each painting in the series is made by focusing on a small detail in my studio, looking at kind of the unconscious gestures that I make as byproducts in the process of painting. So a piece of wall where I wipe my brushes off, or a bit of floor where the paint spills, or a detail of a table where I'm silk screening, or a plastic container where I mix paint. And these details are reproduced or repainted really on canvas again. So they become paintings of gestures. So these are kind of small, this is a triptych that you can see. I'll go back. These paintings are then hung in photographic relationships with each other. So in the series here, I'm scanning across the table. So in the install shot, you can kind of see that it's as if a camera is moving from left to right, and the paintings are kind of like film stills in a movie. And they obviously have like small repeats with each other. And then this is a shot kind of so you can see this is older works in a kind of messy studio environment. And the way that the paintings both kind of like mimic and mine the surfaces, or like use the surfaces of the studio in order to make work. The idea though is to turn this index of a studio surface back into a motif in a painting surface. So to make fun a bit of the modus of painting, of the painting subject, the gesture. Someone I've worked with quite a bit, both as a editor and as a kind of someone that I really respect their views. This writer, Marina Bishmet, has written about the work like this. A blunter play with index to icon transit can be observed here. The mark of paint, which is an index, is turned into a painting, an icon, compressing in that transfer a whole history of canvas as index of gesture, which becomes the icon of artistic genius. But, asks this image, what about the contingencies of housekeeping in the studio? Is a paint drip on some kind of studio surface, canvas, any more expressive than dripping on other walls, others such as a wall or a table? What is this material evidence of? So I hope you can kind of see in the images of the works, or they're kind of like, become again their own gestural surfaces. So they perform as well as kind of signify the gesture. So these two are a zoom in on the same surface. And then these back here are kind of, again, this like pan across. And in this you can see the paintings are hung on unfinished exhibition walls. with the idea that these walls kind of enforce the temporality of the viewing of the painting. So in this exhibition that we're in right now, I overlaid the architectural plan of my flat, my apartment in London, and then my studio. And so we built these kind of metal stud walls, I'll go back, all around, that kind of made these like intimate, or almost intimate kind of spaces within this really large white cube space, which actually used to be a factory producing rugs, which is why I thought it would be funny to deal with the labor of my own work in this show. So the stud walls are basically temporary architecture. They're whatever you build a kind of wall in an exhibition for. They're put up super fast, so they go up within a few hours and they get taken down just as quickly when the show is done. And so for this show, I literally just put plasterboard wherever the paintings were hung. So it's this also kind of very as needs, when it needs to be there, it's there. And then in this one, I'll go back a bit, you can see that the plaster work that's done by the people that put the walls together, the kind of gestures of the plaster work is left to kind of interact with the paintings as well. And so I guess that this idea to kind of always show the works on these temporary walls comes from this idea that exhibitions only last for a couple of weeks. So, why bother kind of finishing, spending so much time and effort to finish the walls? Why not just leave them in the process of making? Okay. And so, in general, there's this it's very important for me that you see in the body of work and in the exhibition that there's both a kind of very painterly and a very photographic life in the paintings. And whose work marks the recognizable quality. And so also in this exhibition, I showed a body of work called The Gestures. Can mistakes and failure be recognized as belonging to a narrative of deliberation, integrity, and ultimate formal value. So these are just some images from the catalog that I've reproduced to kind of show that I am interested in kind of reproducing the paintings as like within the site of their own making and then also within the exhibition site. And this is an old unfinished painting. So this is the entrance to a show also from last year called Routine Pleasures, which was at the Vlees Hall in Middelburg in the Netherlands. In it, I also built a temporary architecture that broke up this kind of long, monumental space, which I think is about 50 meters long or so. And I was kind of thinking about the bones of the Gothic ceiling and the grid, and so this was kind of the first time that I really left most of these walls pretty much empty, and we just put up plaster where we wanted to hang something. So the show is named after the film Routine Pleasures by Jean-Pierre Gorin, who was a filmmaker working with the Vertov group with Godard, and then he moved to San Bernardino or San Francisco, to the West Coast, and started making a series of films. And this film is really fantastic, and he kind of is a voyeur of these two kinds of workers. One is a group of model train enthusiasts, and then the other is the painter Manny Farber, who is a kind of interesting painter, who's a kind of early American painter of the Ben Shahn kind of school, who's painting a situation in his studio table. So I talk about it as in the movie, labor is both maintenance and play. Pleasure and work are collapsed. So we screened the film in the exhibition on the last day on these temporary walls. But I thought I wanted to both pay homage to the film in the show, but I also wanted this kind of work as pleasure to be referenced, and then also this kind of scanning of surfaces that he does in the film. So this is a detail. So you can kind of see that on the right there's a crop that's going on between those two paintings. So this is the painting, and then next to it you just see a wider crop. So there's always this kind of photographic relationship going on. So when you walked through this kind of entryway, you kind of encountered, this is from the back looking out, you kind of saw this V-shaped wall that bisected the space, and then it created this very awkward thin space on the kind of left there that you could squeeze into. And then a lot of these, I'll go back, freestanding walls here, and then at the back, I'll go forward, excuse me, are kind of like offcuts of the architecture within the space. So they're kind of been traced from the actual arches and then built in temporary kind of very lo-fi way. And so the curator, Rose Gorzak, asked me in an interview that we also published in this catalog about the role of the stage in my work. And she related it to the idea of these model train enthusiasts that are in Gorin's film and how they care for their model or their site. About my work, and I think it's a really kind of clear way to think about what I'm trying to ask or trying to think about. This latter question, who gets to be abstract, has been the primary concern of my work in the last few years. In other words, which paintings can appreciably be thought of as belonging to a tradition of artists in whose work gesture is prioritized, in whose work marks of recognizable quality can be detected, and in whose work can mistakes and failure be recognized as belonging to a narrative of deliberation, integrity, and ultimate formal value. So these are just some images from the catalog that I've reproduced to kind of show that I am interested in kind of reproducing the paintings as like within the site of their own making and then also within the exhibition site. And this is an old unfinished painting. This is the entrance to a show also from last year called Routine Pleasures, which was at the Vlees Hall in Middelburg in the Netherlands. In it, I also built a temporary architecture that broke up this kind of long, monumental space, which I think is about 50 meters long or so. And I was kind of thinking about the bones of the Gothic ceiling and the grid, and so this was kind of the first time that I really left most of these walls pretty much empty, and we just put a plaster where we wanted to hang something. So the show is named after the film Routine Pleasures by Jean-Pierre Gorin, who was a filmmaker working with the Vertov group with Godard, and then he moved to San Bernardino or San Francisco, to the West Coast, and started making a series of films. And this film is really fantastic, and he's in it, he kind of is a voyeur of these two kinds of workers. One is a group of model train enthusiasts, and then the other is the painter Manny Farber, who is a kind of interesting painter, who's a kind of early American painter of the Ben Shahn kind of school, who's painting a situation in his studio table. So I talk about it as in the movie, labor is both maintenance and play, pleasure and work or collapse. So we screened the film in the exhibition on the last day on these temporary walls. But I thought I wanted to both pay homage to the film in the show, but I also wanted this kind of work as pleasure to be referenced, and then also this kind of scanning of surfaces that he does in the film. So this is a detail. So you can kind of see that in on the right there, there's a crop that's going on between those two paintings. So this is the painting, and then next to it you just see a wider crop. So there's always this kind of photographic relationship going on. So when you walked through this kind of entryway, you kind of encountered, this is from the back looking out, you kind of saw this V-shaped wall that bisected the space, and then it created this very awkward thin space on the kind of left there that you could squeeze into. And then a lot of these, I'll go back, freestanding walls here, and then at the back, I'll go forward, excuse me, are kind of like offcuts of the architecture within the space. So they're kind of been traced from the actual arches and then built in temporary kind of very lo-fi way. And so the curator, Rose Gorzak, asked me in an interview that we also published in this catalog about the role of the stage in my work. And she related it to the idea of these model train enthusiasts that are in Gorin's film and how they care for their model or their site. So let me read very quickly. And I think this is kind of more interesting. So going back to your question about the stage, this is my answer to Rose. I think that the stage in my work is set by the role of photography. All of my work begins with a photograph and ends up as a painting within a photographic series. So somehow the camera acts as a way of creating a front and a backstage. The paintings are models within the staging, like the model worlds within Gurin's routine pleasures, but they're made by a body who. I can't escape being the author, but I can create a kind of smoke and mirror or a stage that amplifies the question of authorship itself. So yeah, in a lot of the install works, there's a bit of a front and back that happens in the show. And so as you walk around, you also get different views. So this is the front of one wall, and then the back of another wall. And then these two are kind of showing an accumulation of marks, that then this one is like on another wall. So this is like a triptych that you see paint kind of accumulating over time, which is also, I guess, looking at this temporal idea of a painting. And then this is one wall. And then when you went around, when you literally walked around it, you saw this other side. And it's basically two paintings that are the same surface, just rotated. So, I mean, yeah, to me it's quite funny that you would be maybe a little bit confused, like, what did I just see? Was that the same painting if that was on the other side? But yeah, I mean, it's not really meant to kind of, yeah, I don't know, kind of trick anybody, but it's more this idea that like at every angle there's something different, or there's a different way of viewing the works. All right, so this is, I'm going to move on to the next show, another show which also was this year, called Derivative Value, which was at Lübeck in northern Germany. This was in the middle room, which I also showed a kind of a series of these material evidence paintings. This is like a scan across the wall. In Lübeck, the building itself is this kind of beautiful little modernist Kunstverein. And so the wall, it was built in the early 30s, and the walls were stretched of canvas and have been painted kind of a million times. And it's about to be renovated, so I thought, okay, I need to get an image of these walls. So I rubbed, or actually I had the assistants rub the walls of the room and turned those rubbings into wallpaper, which was hung around the room. So you can kind of see here, yeah, that, yeah, the paintings are hanging on a kind of image of the exhibition wall, a document of the exhibition wall, which then can, I guess, get transported, but I'm not sure if it would. And they're also temporary. So between the two, this middle room, or sandwiching this middle room, was two new bodies of work in an ongoing series of silkscreens that I make, which are entitled Blow Up Modernists. So in general, in this exhibition entitled Derivative Value, I wanted to focus and kind of play a bit with this term derivative, which is something that both takes or copies, but also creates value. So if something's derivative, it's like taking from something, but it's also, if we think of a derivative in kind of financial terms, it's something that is creating value. So this is a series of silkscreens on canvas where I was kind of searching for moments in abstract expressionist paintings where artists have copied each other and themselves. So this is 3 paintings where the artist has used a kind of similar M brushstroke, and then they hang together and they're called So it's this kind of, yeah, a bit of a joke with the copy, but also this, you can't quite see, they're really hard to see in reproduction. They're made by taking really extreme details of paintings in catalogs and then getting rid of any color, if there is any in the catalog, and then blowing them up again to a scale of modern painting. So painting where like the viewer is immersed in the surface of the painting. But then what happens in the blow-up is that there's an interference of the printed surface, an interference of like the actual book. So this idea that the closer that you get to this surface, you know, trying to look closely at a painting, the less you actually see. And then also there's this reference, of course, to Antonioni's blow-up, and the kind of sense that there's a crime, you know, happening. And these 2 paintings, I think, are kind of really I guess silkscreen paintings are kind of indicative of that. So this is a diptych where I wanted to kind of explicitly point to a moment of accumulation, which I think perhaps like undermines our entire understanding of like the original thought myth that exists around genius, which is at the basis of our understanding of modernist art. So the image on the left here is a detail of a Jackson Pollock painting, obviously, and on the right is a detail of a painting by the artist Janet Sabel, who is a Ukrainian-born American painter, who did this painting a year before Pollock's first strip painting, and it was exhibited at the Peggy Guggenheim Gallery in New York, and was seen by Pollock, and who also visited her studio and also had a correspondence with Clement Greenberg about it. So what's also interesting for me is that this is the only reproduction of a Janet Sabel painting in print. There's no books on her in libraries. I mean, her paintings are in the MoMA collection, but there's no reproductions of her painting. I got this from the from the Wall Library Archive in London. And this Pollock detail obviously comes from a book about Pollock within a sea of books about Pollock. So for me, a lot in this series is about this idea of who gets reproduced, which is kind of similar to that idea that Eva talks about of like who gets to be abstract. I think that they go hand in hand. So these are two shapes from a Klein and Krasner painting, make out OO form. And then these are a very small series, like they're very small details of early paintings by Avex painters where I found these kind of horizons in romantic landscape horizons. And then this is a detail. And then this is a detail of a different work, but just so that you can kind of see the surface of these prints. So these might be, like this is about life size, maybe. Yeah, this is pretty much life size. So they're of a detail of a work. So they're really quite large prints because the surface is meant to be really quite disruptive, hard to look at. And then in the first room of this exhibition, when you first walk in, I hung a body of work I went to the Gemeente Museum library in Den Haag, and I searched through kind of almost every single Mondrian catalog, looking for this one painting. And then basically these 8 silkscreens in a series show the same painting from catalogs since it was first published in the 1940s until the present, and they show the kind of the disintegration of this one work through time. So looking at kind of how the surface of this Mondrian painting has kind of disintegrated, but looking through reproduction, kind of using reproduction almost as a way by which we viewers witness the death of a painting. And then this is, I think, this size useless. I mean, that's probably about life size, maybe a bit smaller. So in general, a lot of the other works in this series blow up modernists. I'm looking for works that are made by male abstract painters that are damaged, and I'm focusing on that damage in extreme detail. So there's a kind of double interference of the image. So there's both the kind of print interference of the page, and then also the kind of the cracks or the aging that are interfering with the kind of original intentions of the paintings. And then I think of them in a way as kind of making dead icons. And then I wanted to run through kind of a bit quickly some older exhibitions that kind of give a sense of the way in which the paintings have been staged in different environments. So this was at the Blue Coat last year in Liverpool, with this kind of installation whereby it looks like the workers just went for lunch halfway through. And then again, in these, like each time that these paintings get shown, the walls have these completely different gestures. on them of these plaster marks, which I think is funny, because you can't instruct people to do it, they just do it how they want. So these guys, I think, hadn't done it for a while, but I really quite like the gestures that were made. And that's a detail of one of the paintings. This was a few years ago in New York, and this is the back side of that wall. And this is a kind of cropping between the paintings. And then in the show, this show, I built a kind of false wall in this kind of window front of this commercial gallery and hung a painting kind of sandwiched in the window so that you could only see it from the street. And it also kind of blocked your view of the show from the street. Oh, this is an older version of the talk. That's okay. And then this is a view of a show that, at Wheels in Brussels, where I installed the painting. These walls actually are also kind of offcuts of the architecture in the building, and then they were on wheels, at Wheels, so they could move around, but which they thought was quite funny. But then, yeah, so I mean, and yeah, so they kind of had these semi-monumental. I called it the pink elephant in the room. It just looked, yeah. I mean, so, but in general, I think in the making of exhibitions, I'm oftentimes thinking about this term theater in the round, or like this idea that like making a exhibition is in a way very similar to thinking about how things are viewed from all angles, and that there's a kind of performative aspect to the way in which people are viewing the work. So again, this kind of play with the front and the back, and what you're seeing of me in the paintings, and what you're seeing of kind of decisions in the install. So in a way, you are oftentimes seeing the process, but actually, yeah, I don't know. It's not a kind of, it's a very removed, I think, set of decisions. And I think in general, this idea of thinking about the exhibition as a theater in the round, or thinking about the exhibition as the possibility of something that's outside of a kind of normative space of how we think of an exhibition, comes from this piece of writing, which is a play, which I found in the winter of 2010 in a library. And it's one of the few plays written by the early modernist poet named Mina Loy. So Loy is a kind of well-known in this really cult circle of poetry circles. She has very unusual syntax and unusual use of vocabulary, and she was the mistress of Marinetti, the futurist, and then she wrote the Feminist Futurist Manifesto, which is really actually quite interesting. And she, was published in some of these really early modernist poetry journals with Ezra Pound and Gertrude Stein and William Carlos Williams. So this play is called Collision, and it's part of two plays, and it was written in 1916. So when I read it about, I guess, 6 years ago now, I was really struck by the idea that it's this, can you read it from there? No? You can't? Okay, I'll read it out loud to you then, because I think that it's interesting. So it's called Collision. Huge hall, disparate planes, angles, whiteness, central arc light, blaze, emptiness, but for one man. A dependent has shut the door. Man, back, bang door, succession, incentive, ejection, idea, space, cleared of nothings, leaves everything, material, exhaustless creation. Stares blankly into arc light, presses electric button, shattering insistent noise surrounds room. Intermittently, arc light extinguishes, varicolored shafts of lightning crash through 59 windows at irregular heights. The floor, worked by propellers, rises and falls irrhythmically. The dissymmetric, receding and incursive planes and angles of walls and ceiling interchange kaleidoscopically to successive intricacies. Occasional explosions erupt the modes of disharmony. Man rushes floor with gesture of veteran mariner in hurricane. As the pandemonium of sound and motion increases, he calms. Man. At last, vibration is intensified to the requisite ratio. For every latent conscious and subconscious impulse to respond to automatically, completely, virility ceases to be implicated in disintegrate autostimuli, leaving the nucleus free for self-activity, expansion, extension, intention, creation. The vibrations accelerate to supervelocity, reach the static, the light is uniform, the plane's uniform, motion repose, dim silence, the man rigid, his mind concentrated. Out of the attained unison, a new tremor produces itself as it graduates to the primary celerity in the secondary inception, the curtain falls, the curtain falls. So I think I've always thought of this, when I found it, I thought I've never read anything like this before, and I think everyone that's interested in Mina Loy has this kind of moment where they go like, I can't believe they find her in a library somewhere and they can't believe they've never heard of this person before. But what I found really interesting about it was that it feels like it describes a collapsing of space. And it was written at a time in 1916 where there's this kind of transformation of the exhibition space from salon to gallery, or from the space of a kind of academy into a temporary space. So I was thinking about the kind of temporality of the play. I also thought of it as like a 1-minute play or something, and that it's kinetic and it's fast. And so in a way, I've always kind of thought of it as this kind of script for an alternate, maybe female space of modernism. Like, what would modernism have looked like if the women in modernism and their vision had been kind of reproduced. As an exhibition, I staged the play with a corporal mime. This is the exhibition of the Blue Coat, who studied in the direct lineage from Etienne de Creux, who was the father of modern mime. So this is her performing the play. For the performance, the mime basically installs the show live. And there was music performed by Norton Norby Halverson and Chris Evans, who worked together. So we all worked actually together in order to kind of really stage the play. So we're really reading the play, and the mime read live. I'll actually play it at the end silently when we're doing questions. And then when the performance was over, so here's her kind of interacting as well with the basically the props and paint, the things that make a painting that are all props making up this. And this is what it looked like when it was all installed. And then this stayed up. This is a detail. I'll go back to this. This kind of installation stayed up for a week. And then the mime came back. And over the course of the day, she de-installed the show. Also like live, but I mean, not performatively, more as like a worker. Like she was, I think she was, I don't think she was wearing her costume. It was kind of like the backstage. Like she came back and she was on a scissor lift, kind of taking them down and wrapping up the rope and, kind of bundling everything to the side and basically packing everything in the art handling way. And so the stage, or the body of this installation, the work, the painting, is made of a bunch of 59 silk screens of these lines. So in a way, it's like these 59 windows that Loy is talking about. So that's this idea of like a kaleidoscoping of these shapes kind of coming up. And the lines are mimicked in these shapes that are basically frames that have rope going through them at the same thickness of the lines of back. So they create a moire when you walk in front of them, like a silkscreen moire. So they make a kind of vibration with your eyes. And yeah, they're very different in person. And this is just an example of some older exhibitions that also use this kind of structure of this screen that's printed over and over again. This is like the same screen printed over and over and over again to make these kind of monumental, here you can see the size of them, works that hang in space. The works are hung, these screens are hung on pulley systems. So in the performance, the mime is literally just kind of pulling these ropes with the screens going up with sandbags, holding them down. So using the kind of the structure of theater, and this how these screens in these installations also are hung with sandbags and pulleys. And that's kind of this, that's probably about life size of how the lines are printed. So just to finish up, so this kind of, what I've just shown, this kind of directly performative side to my practice is very much related to my work as an editor of a series of feminist magazines where I commission new writing by female artists on topics of interest, which have come about through a series of female artist meetings that I organized starting in 2010. That only happened for about a year, but in those meetings I kind of got an idea of some of the main concerns to female artists in New York and London and Berlin and Amsterdam, and the magazines were kind of made in response to the meetings as a way to kind of make a space for these questions. So this is the cover of the magazine Labor, and this is the cover of the magazine Persona. And I'm now working on a series which is titled We Not I, which had its first incarnation as a series of meetings and events at Artist Space about 1 year ago, in which I delivered the talk Presence and Absence. So I'll finish with the end of the talk here. Back to the dropout. So the dropout is a negative character in the sense of creating negative space around something. For myself, taking a step back from the front stage allows me to play with the normative role of artist in making objects. I can embody myself as a performer, a painter, a machine, a director, and an editor. I look to the dropout to see a freedom of movement, a radical thing, something with no value to exchange, no information to cull, just a gesture for all that's worth. Okay. And so I thought what I would do is, with no sound, the music is great, but I don't want to play the sound because I don't think the recording does the sound justice. It just sounds tinny. And you've read the script, you've heard the script, so you can just watch the installation. Yeah. We'll see how long the questions are.
So you are welcome to ask questions. Thank you very much for this interesting talk.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Göksu, and I would like to ask that apparently, obviously, like your main concern is the position of female artists in the art world, but it's like still unfortunately male-dominated, white, heterosexual, male-dominated. And you have been mentioning that like what are the main concerns of female artists, and like in the 21st century, especially like from your own perspective. I mean, like if we go to even here, if we go to Ropach, like Georg Bazaris, who said that women cannot paint, like he's still there with huge, like no one like tells him like what the fuck you are, who do you think you are, you know, like, and then he's still being represented from this like famous gallery. And like I was wondering from your own perspective, what are the main concerns?
Well, I mean, I don't think, yeah, I mean, I guess I went over it very quickly, but basically I organized a series of female artist meetings a long time ago, at a time when I wasn't sure if it was what people wanted to. I mean, I think in 2010 the conversation was a bit different than it is now, actually. Or I think I was still working on it in 2009. So they were called conversation to know if there's a conversation to be had. So the idea was to invite kind of pretty much any working female artist within a city, and so the first meeting was at Dexter Sinister in New York in 2010, and was about like 15 people there. It was a nice group, and then we spent like 8 hours kind of talking. And then some of the things that came out in that meeting and in other meetings I thought were really interesting. So there was this kind of conversation about why do women artists participate in a kind of, basically why do we participate in an art world in which we'll never reap the benefit of the true value of it? Like, I mean, and so why do we then even give an interest into this? So I thought that's quite interesting. And then a lot of discussion about kind of the way in which kind of all of artists are becoming feminized workers, and that their work is being kind of accumulated from them by, I could go into it, but yeah, so I mean, so I think the idea was rather than kind of take the meetings and say, and record them or something, I thought it'd be really nice to kind of give women a kind of voice in the publishing sense, that they can talk about things that I think are important to all of the contemporary art world, but from their own perspective. So Labor had like, I mean, there was an interview in it with Wage, which is like Working Artists for the Greater Economy, which is a kind of group in New York. Well, it's actually not a group, which is great, and with between Marina and Wage. And then there was a presentation by Abigail Moss on, I think she had done on painting actually, and then which actually is referenced a lot in Isabella Graw's recent book, which I thought was interesting. And then, I did actually a thing on an interview with Lucy Scayer where she talks about her role in Henry VIII's Wives, which is, I think, a really funny collective, like talking about how they did a piece where they put themselves through a Christmas tree wrapper. I mean, so it like looked, and then there was a piece by Nina Power, who is a really well-known, at least in the UK, kind of like, so it was kind of looking at all these different, and then Persona is like much thicker, and I spent like 2 years really talking with artists, so people from Rita McBride and Darian Martin and Celine Condarelli, and it's people kind of, I mean, I think for me it was really important to commission writing, do you know what I mean, to kind of create a space, I mean, not paid, which was problematic, but so I think in Persona a lot of the, and then Chris Kraus basically donated an interview that hadn't been published before, and Eva Kenny wrote a couple of pieces which are fantastic. She was doing her PhD on embarrassment, which I thought was a really great, so it was in a way trying to kind of go with these, like, so Persona is something that's like, who are you, what do you put forward to the art world as an artist, you know, how much can you give, you know what I mean, how much do you want to hold back, especially as a woman, you know what I mean, I don't know, but it seems important to a lot of artists, you know, that's what's been nice about the publications, is that, and then when we released them, we launched them, there was always performances that would happen, or I would commission performances, so we would do them at art spaces, so that the idea was that it was productive, like that every element of the process was productive. So I wouldn't say that they're like an overview, but I think these questions, so the main questions that I deciphered were this idea of like the artist as worker, like, and how you can negotiate that, the artist as a persona that you put forward, and then the new thing that, what we did at Artist Space was to, it's called We Not I, and we did it, I did it also in London in 2015, and we hung out at Raven Row, we squatted Raven Row quite a few times, which is nice, but it wasn't part of the program. And then we did a series of events at the South London Gallery. It was kind of to invite artists to come and talk about something that they've been working on that is around this idea of genius, maybe. But a lot of people were really against this term genius. It was this idea of what how we works in the art world, like, and all the problems involved in that in terms of accumulation, collaboration, that kind of, which is still vague. So I want to do a series of publications with it, Does that answer your question? I'm sorry, it's a long answer.
I was just
We've already gone almost halfway through the video.
so the main.
Going for launches, because it's not a female-only audience. I think that their topics and the writing is like really, I think, good, and a lot of people. It's a lot of male artists are also asking me for, you know what I mean? Like I think it's these questions are also important for male artists, but I think it's really interesting that to see them through a female lens, because I think I'm always interested in this idea that the female voice gets lost historically, and so that perspective is important to kind of keep or to publish, to kind of reproduce, Still got 5 minutes and 37 seconds of the time.
Maybe I have one. Actually, I have one, sorry. Hi, thank you. About the paintings that you showed us at the beginning with the gestures, you took photograph of your actual studio where the stains were, if I understood it right. Were these stains there because you paint other paintings, right?
Yeah, there's no original. It's just the studio. It's just messy.
So you paint there, or is because you paint them on purpose, or you were working
Oh no,
on
they're
other
all
paintings?
unconscious. Yeah, it's just like a studio is messy. So no, it's just the byproducts of painting in a studio. So they're all completely unconscious.
Okay.
That's the point of them, is that they're kind of my unconscious gestures, like that I'm reproducing. So the idea of the abstract expressionist, or an expression or an abstraction, an abstract gesture, where does it come from? It comes from the unconscious, or it comes from, who makes,
Just because you are working there, no?
Yeah.
Someone
The actual story is that, when I moved to London, I still had my studio in Brussels, and so I was like taking photos of my studio, and taking it with me.
You were painting something very different, and then.
I was painting, but I always paint different stuff too. It's like, you do a lot of different stuff in your studio that maybe never gets seen. It's a place, it's a process. It's a place of making things. So, and then it's like, for example, in the show at the Blaze Hall, like these, I was printing like all of these works, at one point, and then you've got this table, and then I just started mixing paint on that table, and then I photographed where I was mixing paint, and then those became paintings, and then where I painted them, there's marks that go on the walls, so it's like this really accumulative process, and then actually you paint the floor, and then it all starts again, or you paint the wall, but it's just a wall, that I both find actually quite, I'm still interested in it. I haven't gotten bored yet of this, because it mutates and it changes, so I think that's interesting. But then also, I think that it's as an idea, or as a kind of representation of myself, or something, or thing. So the book that I just made is called Painting Behind Itself, and it's taking a bit of a joke. Well, I was talking with Eva, who wrote the essay, and then we decided to title the book after it, but it was taking a bit of this joke with this Jozalit's essay, Painting Besides Itself. But then she also, in her essay, I didn't want to get into it in the talk, but she gives this really nice kind of metaphor about the first ever, considered one of the first abstract paintings, which is by the painter Franzisk Kuka, and it's called Madame Kuka Amongst the Verticals. And he painted the face of his wife in 1910, I could look. And then he overpaints the face, I actually have it here, I can find it, with a series of lines. Let's see if I can, here it is. Can you kind of see that painting here? Yeah, it's in black and white, it's a color painting. And so she's kind of dissolving into And then she also, I mean, it's kind of this pun that like, the figure of the woman disappears in modernism, like it was so present before modernism and then it disappears, so where did it go? Yeah, but so I think that's also, we're kind of, me and Eva were really interested in this idea that, and she's, I've been trying to get her to let me name one of my shows Female Genius, but, because it's a term, but so I asked her to write about my work once, and she wrote a quiz called Are You a Female Genius? Which is great, do you know what I mean? I mean, so I think in my conversations with her, we're really interested in this kind of joke, but I am quite serious about this idea of like that there's this figure of a woman that's behind these paintings of mine, and it's, it's my own gestures, but in a way there's a real remove, like it's not actually a kind of big abstract painting that but it's doing the same thing as what that idea of an abstract painting would do. It's producing an unconscious gesture, just with a bit of photography between, or distance, and then I think it's really important that everything ends up being like a photograph again, like that it performs, that it has to perform again. Do you know what I mean? Like they're not hung like so that they're fetishistic abstract paintings. They're hung like that they have a story and that they're part of this process. Anyway, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And are the paintings at that scale so they feel domestic rather than Chelsea size, or the size of the work?
They're the size of photographs.
Right.
So they're usually sequence size. So I copied the size of Arlene Quinlan's paintings, photos once. I just think that photo size is really interesting. But then no, they can't, I've been thinking about that, to make them monumental. See, that would just fetishize them, and I think it's really important that they remain at the scale of, because all the other work that I do has very different scale to it. I think scale is something I'm super conscious about. So the blow-ups are the scale, much bigger.
Yeah.
They're
But there's something to do with authenticity about it as well. If it would perhaps seem inauthentic if they outreach the stretch of an arm or something.
Yeah.
If they're taking an authentic gesture, making it inauthentic by the remove, then if you do that, if you make it inauthentic even further, perhaps that feels too much. I'm just thinking.
Yeah. Weirdly, they're already quite a big blow up. When people come to my studio, they're a little bit shocked because they think it's actually the jet, all the marks and everything. And sometimes they're just really small, details. So I think that's quite funny that people are like, oh, is that it? I think it's going to be this studio with these marks, kind of. But it's not. It's just a wall, with some, yeah.
You also mentioned another painter who, let's say, Pollock was influenced. And I forgot the name of the painter, but how did you come across this painter? And have you ever seen that Pollock has a reference to her in any interview or?
Because I've been kind of interested in this. I was doing something where I was kind of writing a little bit, and I met with somebody, and I was writing a bit about the idea of the genius, or trying to unpick. Because also in the series of events in Artist Space in Weimar, I asked the artist Meredith Sparks to give a talk. She's done quite a bit of research into the idea, the proposition, the evidence that the fountain by Duchamp was not by Duchamp, but rather by this artist called Elsa Freitag von Loringhoven, which is a kind of like debate that goes on and on and on in the art world because Duchamp wrote to his sister in 1917 kind of describing the fountain as being done by his female friend. And there's also a bit of debate because Rose Selvey is very much kind of a similar thing to, like, she was there's actually an interview between, I set up an interview between Meredith and the curator Lizette Smits in the Labor magazine about the female dandy. And so, yeah, they talk a bit about Elsa, because she's this kind of female dandy. She dressed up. She was a Dadaist, but she was also kind of like, she died kind of penniless, you know. She had this kind of strange, how do you say, baroness title, but she was kind of living a trampy life in New York and this stuff. Anyway, but there's a lot of, and they were friends, like Elsa and Duchamp were friends, but also he was slightly, anyway, she's done quite a bit of research, and there's a book, I think by Irene Gamel, is that, am I right, on this? Anyway, so I was talking, it's actually on the Artist Space website, it's a great talk, and it's just one of those things, like, you keep kind of saying this, and it just kind of keeps, you know, going, you say it into empty air, but I think there's something super, super interesting about finding these moments, I mean, because you still read, I mean, this moment of the drip and the moment of the fountain are these two pinnacles of kind of the origin of the genius in modern art, and so much kind of discourse is based on that, and if both of them are myths, you know, I mean, because myths are built up over time. And the story, the kind of intrigue goes on in the fountain, you know, because, you know, Alfred Stieglitz took the photo, and that's the only photo of the original, and then, you know, Duchamp didn't actually declare it his work until after Stieglitz had died, and, you know, Elsa was already dead, and so, you know what I mean, there's this kind of like, but yes, someone that I met basically said that, she said, oh, have you heard of Janet Sobel? Janet Sobel, Janetsobel, and there's a few articles online that talk about, I personally need to do the research, you know what I mean, like this is something I'm kind of wanting to work on, is go and find this letter between Pollock and Greenberg, but online you can look, and there's a few articles that talk about basically like, I mean, it's well known that she did a show at Peggy Guggenheim's, and these paintings are actually from, I think, 1946, and Pollock's first strip painting is from 1927, so that's fact. You know, but and then there's a kind of letter that I've not personally seen, but I've heard about, which is from Pollock to from Greenberg to Pollock, in which he's talking about their visit to Sobel's studio. And she was Ukrainian born, and so she kind of was in New York, and then she did a show at the Guggenheim's, and then she kind of moved to New Jersey to raise her children. You know, so, yeah, but MoMA does have some of her works, because I think they're seen as these kind of strangely peripheral figure to Pollock, you know what I mean? But then the question is actually, were they first? And, you know, but then you know, it all comes, does it really matter? Because, but the idea that these original thoughts were not original, you know, I mean, that's, I think, what I'm always, you know, interested in, like in all of the paintings and in the works in general, I'm kind of interested in debunking this idea of the original, you know, but not in a Barth sense. I don't know. You know, not in maybe this super academic sense. I don't know. Even though maybe I just gave an academic talk, but yeah.
Okay, so thank you everybody for being here, and thank you especially Melissa for this very enlightening talk about your multi-facets of your work, which really fascinated me. So tomorrow, you won't believe it, there is only one performance at Melissa's class at 8. Yeah, this is it, no talks. So 8 p.m. at Melissa's class you will have a performative painting class.
We're gonna keep it to half an hour, and there'll be beer.
Okay, so thank you everybody, and join Melissa's class tomorrow.